This is my update for Russian military operations in Ukraine for December 17th, 2022. As I like to do, let's take a look at the map. This is liveuamap.com. It is very pro-Ukrainian, so keep that in mind when taking a look at it. And as you can see, just at face value, you can see these mean air defense systems are active. Ukraine claims they're shooting down all of these Russian missiles and drones that have been being fired at Ukraine for the over a day now. And we also see that the front line is more or less static. I wouldn't say static as in nothing is going on, but there's a lot of positional fighting taking place. And there is intense combat taking place in and around Bakhmut. And even this pro-Ukrainian map is admitting that Russian forces are on the offensive and they are taking territory. This is a small town. Right here, they claim this private military contractor, Wagner, has taken this town. So that is the situation on the ground. I want to talk a little bit more about these missile and drone strikes. So from the BBC, this article right here, Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv, without power after Russian strikes. And the article says, Ukraine's second city of Kharkiv, or I call it Kharkov, was for hours left without power after the latest wave of Russian strikes targeted energy stations across the country. Local officials said as many as 9 power facilities were hit by Russian forces as Russian forces fired 76 missiles and carried out drone attacks on Friday. Kharkiv's mayor said the city suffered colossal damage. By the evening, 55% of residents had electricity back. The article also claims that Russia has launched more than 1,000 missiles and Iranian-made attack drones since the wave of strikes began on 10 October. So since October, over 1,000 missiles and drones have struck Ukraine. If you look at the total number of missiles and drones since this all began in February, the Russian special military operation began in late February, we're talking thousands of missiles and other long-range precision-guided weapons. But the BBC also claims, although most of them have been intercepted by air defenses. Well, that is highly unlikely if Ukraine's power grid is this heavily damaged. It's highly unlikely that most of the missiles have been intercepted and only a few got through. This type of damage would not be possible. Let's look at this Guardian article. Russia carries out more mass strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Power outages reported after a barrage of rockets fired at several regions in second such attack in days. So this is Russia, who apparently ran out of missiles but still carries out these massive salvos. So again, we're being lied to by the Western media, who's repeating Western governments and the Ukrainian government, who are just blatantly lying. So the Guardian says Ukraine's state energy company Yoreniko said energy consumption had fallen by 50% as a result of the attacks, and that it would take longer to restore the electricity supply than after previous attacks. So the damage must have been extensive. Russia had hit thermal power plants, hydroelectric plants, and substations of main networks. They said air defense forces appeared to have caught most of the incoming rockets in places and claimed 60 out of 76 rockets launched were downed. Well, again, the type of damage that they're talking about does not correlate with the number of missiles they claim they've intercepted. They're obviously lying about that. That number, every single time they provide numbers of missiles that they've intercepted, is just pure war propaganda. But let's just say that they're telling the truth. Let's just say they're telling the truth. And only 16 missiles are causing this much damage. This is Russia's objective. Their objective is to wipe out the power grid, and they are clearly, demonstrably wiping out the power grid. So whether Ukraine is intercepting all of these missiles or intercepting none of them, it's the same outcome. The power grid is disappearing. So it's an exercise in futility for Ukraine either way. Now, I have not done this in a while, a Pentagon press briefing. It's not because I don't want to. It's because they have become very far and few between. And that's because there really isn't a lot of good news for the Pentagon to talk about in regards to its proxy war in Ukraine. Let's look at this one, though. Pentagon Press Secretary Air Force Brigadier General Pat Ryder holds an on-camera press briefing December 15th, 2022. And if we scroll all the way down, you'll notice that there is a video that comes with it. If you want to watch it, the video, the link will be in the video description below this video. So this is what General Ryder says. He says, the Department of Defense is announcing that we will expand US-led training for the Ukrainian armed forces to include joint maneuver and combined arms operations training, while building upon the specialized equipment training that we're already providing to the Ukrainians. Combined arms maneuver training is a logical next step in our ongoing training efforts, which began in 2014 to build the Ukrainian armed forces capacity. I don't know if we're supposed to be impressed that the Pentagon has been training Ukrainian forces since 2014, or dismayed, considering the circumstances in Ukraine right now at this juncture. General Ryder also says this joint maneuver and combined arms training will be conducted by the U.S. Army Europe and African Command's 7th Army Training Command at U.S. ranges in Germany. So you're going to be taking Ukrainian troops previously, before the special military operation began, NATO was training Ukrainian troops in Ukraine. And there were already limits to how much they could do in regards to that. And that was in Ukraine under relatively ideal conditions. Now, under much less than ideal conditions, they will be moving Ukrainian troops out of the country to Germany, training them and bringing them back. This program, this extended training, will provide training to approximately 500 Ukrainians per month. Only 500 per month. It's essentially focused at battalion level. And so as we move forward, we will stay flexible and adaptable based on the needs of our Ukrainian partners and the evolving situation in Ukraine. So 500 Ukrainian troops per month. Ukraine loses this many troops in 1, 2, maybe 3 days. That's how many troops Ukraine is losing. The Western media during these press briefings gets to ask questions. So one of the questions was, when is this expected to begin? So he says sometime in January, and then he gives some details on the training. He says, what you can expect to see is that we will, as mentioned, bring in battalion-sized units, and it will begin with things like live fire exercises, followed by squad, platoon, and company level training. That will then culminate in battalion level maneuver training. Importantly, it will also include battalion headquarters staff training. So the way to think about this is, as you show up for your training, first you're doing the classroom exercises to better understand what it is that you're going to learn, right? It's going to be crawl, walk, run. And then you're going to shift to the practical application, starting from the squad, platoon to the battalion level of applying these concepts, culminating in a field exercise where you're getting into more advanced training scenarios, how to respond to situations. This is all happening within the span of only 1 month, which is an incredibly short amount of time to fit in all of this training for these troops that will then go back to Ukraine and be in the middle of an actual war. Then some members of the Western media ask why this training is being provided now, and if it has something to do with how well the Ukrainians are doing in the middle of this conflict, because a lot of people in the Western media honestly believe the Kharkiv, the Kherson offensive, these were tremendous victories and only just the beginning of more Ukrainian victories to come. And I'll get into how even the head of Ukraine's military admits that no, that's simply not the case. But this is what General Ryder says. He says, as we continue to see Ukraine make progress in terms of pushing Russia back and receiving this new equipment, like I said earlier, the idea here is to be able to give them this advanced level of collective training that enables them to conduct effective combined arms operations and maneuver on the battlefield. You're not going to accomplish that in 1 month, I'm sorry, and 500 troops at a time. It's just not possible. It simply isn't. Another journalist, Western journalist, asks whether this training is going to enable Ukraine to carry out greater large-scale offensive operations for whenever the ground freezes during the winter. And this illustrates how clueless the Western media is regarding this conflict that they presume they're going to inform the public about. We're talking 500 troops a month. So between January, when this training begins, January, February, let's say all of March, at the end of March, you'll have only 1,500 troops. That additional 1,500 troops is not going to enable Ukraine to carry out some sort of larger scale offensive operation than they've already carried out in Kharkiv or Kherson. And again, as I'm going to point out, even the head of Ukraine's military forces is explaining how this just isn't possible. But this goes to show you how disconnected Western journalists are from reality. And these are the people the public depends on in terms of understanding what's going on in Ukraine. Now, General Ryder keeps talking about combined arms maneuver warfare, and someone in this audience seems to understand that combined arms warfare usually means infantry, tanks, but also aviation, helicopters, warplanes. It's pretty much everything all being used together in a collective way. That's what combined arms warfare means. And so they asked General Ryder, are there going to be aircraft involved in this, even though Ukraine really doesn't have an air force? And he says, no, it's just ground forces. But even just for ground forces, combined arms warfare would mean infantry, machine gunners, mortars, but then together with artillery, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry fighting vehicles, all of these elements working in a combined way. That would be combined arms warfare. And Ukraine doesn't have any of these either. They have small and ever dwindling numbers of all of this. So technically, what General Ryder might be referring to is riflemen, machine gunners, mortars, and a very limited amount of artillery. Maybe that's what they'll be doing in Germany. I honestly don't know, but it falls far short of what we would traditionally think as combined arms warfare, and it falls far short of what Russia is doing on the battlefield. They have infantrymen, machine gunners, mortarmen. They also have large numbers of tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles. They have a huge amount of artillery, artillery shells, rocket artillery. They have long-range ballistic missiles. They have cruise missiles. They have the whole range of equipment, weapon systems, and military units to carry out true combined arms warfare against Ukraine, which doesn't and will not be getting these elements anytime in the near or even intermediate future. So I guess this is a good time to talk about what the West will be sending Ukraine and what all the problems are involving these systems that the West either has or will send Ukraine. So during the press briefing, someone asks General Ryder about the Patriot missile systems that are supposedly going to be sent to Ukraine. He has no additional information about that, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about the Patriot missile system. Now, in my last video, exclusively about the US sending Patriot missiles to Ukraine, I talked about Lockheed Martin's missile production, how it's 250 missiles per year, and how they wanted to double it to 500 missiles. And I said it will take years to do. What I did not realize, and what a Patreon supporter pointed out, was that the article I was citing was from 2018. So I want to make a little bit of a correction, but as you will see, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. So this article from Camden News, which was cited by the official Lockheed Martin website, Lockheed Martin accelerates production of PAC-3 MSE. So they're talking about expanding the production of these missiles. And the article says, Lockheed Martin has steadily increased production numbers of PAC-3 MSE since achieving a full rate production decision in 2018, and is expected to increase to annual production of 500 of these missiles by 2024. So not next year, the year after that. They claim they will be at 500 missiles. The increased capacity will be supported in part by an 85,000 square foot building expansion at the Camden facility, expected to begin production operations in the second quarter of 2022. So it took Lockheed Martin about 6 years to go from 250 missiles to 500 missiles per year. And they had to build this additional space to do that. And so the next time they want to expand production and they build a facility like this, this will allow them to produce an additional 250 missiles per year. It will not allow them to double from 500 to 1,000. That will require much more space to do that. So this is the problem. This is the problem. As I pointed out in my previous video, even if Lockheed Martin right now was producing 500 missiles per year and they sent every single missile to Ukraine, it still would not be enough to shoot down all of Russia's just cruise missiles alone. We're not even talking about drones, Iskander missiles, or any other long-range system Russia is employing. That is because, according to Ukraine, Russia is building up to 40 cruise missiles per month, but they're probably building more than that. And even if they were just building 40 a month, they're probably working to increase that number month to month. So 500 Patriot missiles are not going to shoot down 500 cruise missiles. It's going to be several missiles for every one cruise missile downed at best. And then we still have drones and other long-range weapons being used by Russia on Ukraine. So the Patriot missile system is not going to protect Ukraine's skies the way people imagine that it will. It cannot, it will not now, not into the near or intermediate future. But remember the BBC article that I just cited at the beginning of this video. They admit from just October onward, Russia has fired over 1,000 missiles and drones. So right there is twice as many targets than Lockheed Martin produces total Patriot missiles every single year, from October until now. So in other words, short of massive military industrial expansion, we're talking about unprecedented investment in building up the West's ability to produce weapons at a large scale. Short of that, there is no long-term solution to this problem, and there is absolutely nothing, literally nothing the West can do short-term to solve this problem Ukraine has, that they are running out of absolutely everything, and Russia is still showing up with new weapons on the battlefield, even at this stage of this very intense, protracted conflict. There is some other news. This is also related to air defense. The ammunition for the German Gepard, this tracked, self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, they claim it's working wonders shooting down these drones, despite Ukraine's power grid still disappearing. And it requires 35 millimeter ammunition, if I'm not mistaken. And apparently this was produced in Switzerland. And Switzerland said they are not transferring this ammunition to Ukraine because they want to remain neutral. They don't want to get involved in this, and who could blame them? So from Turkish media, this is a Turkish media source, German arms company Rheinmetall expands ammunition production. Rheinmetall wants to expand local ammunition production after Switzerland objected to ammunition deliveries to Ukraine. And as I've explained many times, expanding production takes time. So let's see what this article has to say about Germany expanding ammunition production. German arms company Rheinmetall is expanding its ammunition production in Germany. The facilities for so-called medium caliber ammunition should be ready in January, the defense company confirmed to the DPA news agency. So that's actually quite quick. One of the triggers is a veto by Switzerland regarding ammunition deliveries to Ukraine. The export of old stocks of the weapons material needed for the Gepard anti-aircraft gun tanks would have required the approval of the Swiss government. However, Switzerland invoked its neutrality and rejected the delivery. The article also says production of the ammunition is scheduled to start in June 2023. So the facilities will be ready in January. Production will begin in June 2023. In addition, Rheinmetall would then be in a position to deliver the first batch of Gepard ammunition as early as July, a company spokesman said. According to reports, this will involve up to 300,000 rounds for Ukraine if the German government places a corresponding order. So at the earliest, it'll be over half a year before this ammunition is going to reach Ukraine. And there's a lot of ifs involved in whether this is even going to happen or not. And so you add that to the Patriot missile shortage that actually began before Russia began its special military operation in Ukraine. Before any Patriot missile systems are going to be sent to Ukraine, they're already running out of Patriot missiles because Saudi Arabia is burning through not only its own stockpiles, but the stockpiles of its neighbors, because the US doesn't make enough missiles each year to replace what Saudi Arabia is burning through. And now you're going to send it to Ukraine, where they will burn through even more missiles because they will be faced with many more targets. And then add that to the West running out of artillery shells, running out of artillery pieces to fire the artillery shells, the steady depletion of Ukrainian tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and armored personnel carriers, their air force being virtually non-existent. Again, you can see how desperate the situation is for Ukraine. This is something that the Western media has been slowly, but I would say surely, admitting to over the last couple of months now, actually. And there has been this media blitz conducted primarily through the British media, interviewing senior Ukrainian military leaders and also President Vladimir Zelensky himself. And it represents Ukraine itself, Ukraine's leadership itself, and beginning to admit and realize the situation that they're in. So Alexander Mercouris of the Duran, he did an excellent video on this media blitz, and in particular the interview of Ukrainian General Zaluzhny. I put the link to Alexander's video in the video description below. Please check it out. But I kind of want to go over and reiterate some of these points. It's in an interview in The Economist, an interview with General Valery Zaluzhny, head of Ukraine's armed forces. And all throughout this interview, you're not hearing this confidence or optimism that we've heard in the past from Ukraine's leadership. And we knew then that the optimism and confidence was an act, that they knew how bad the situation is. Well, they're dropping the act. And we can debate about why they're dropping the act. But one of the questions in this interview was whether or not Ukraine is holding back on its advance on Crimea. Because, again, a lot of people believe that the Kharkiv offensive followed by the Kherson offensive, these were tremendous Ukrainian victories. And it was the beginning of a much wider offensive that Ukraine was pursuing, and that they were on the verge of pushing Russia out of all territory Kiev claims is Ukrainian. And we know that that is not true. And now we see Ukraine hesitating. So what happened? Why has everything ground to a halt? Well, it's grinding to a halt because, as I said, it was not the beginning of a great Ukrainian victory. It was the beginning of the end for Ukraine. It was one last desperate push before everything started irreversibly collapsing. This is exactly like the Ardennes offensive during World War II. The Germans threw everything they had into that offensive, and then after that, it was just an irreversible collapse until their complete defeat. So this is what General Zaluzhny says. He says, "I know that I can beat this enemy, but I need resources. I need 300 tanks, 600 to 700 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 howitzers. Then I think it is completely realistic to get to the lines of February 23rd. But I can't do it with 2 brigades. I get what I get, but it is less than what I need. It is not yet time to appeal to Ukrainian soldiers in the way that Mannheim appealed to Finnish soldiers." And Alexander Mercouris does a great job explaining what he means by that. That was essentially Finland being in the exact same situation Ukraine is in, and finally admitting that there was no way they were going to beat the Soviet Union, and so they capitulated. And this is what General Zaluzhny is referring to, and the fact that he's referring to this at all means that they're starting to talk about eventual defeat. That is what they're doing. Now, 300 tanks, 600 to 700 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 howitzers. The West couldn't send this to Ukraine if they wanted to. They can't. It's not a matter of will. It's a matter of they physically do not have this to send to Ukraine without their whole military disappearing and just being transferred to Ukraine and then also disappearing, because I'll tell you exactly what will happen. Ukraine, let's just say they get all of this all at one time, which is impossible, but let's just say it's possible and they get all of this all at one time and they launch this massive offensive. What they'll do is they'll initially overwhelm Russia. Russia will fall back. They're not going to allow their troops to be encircled and destroyed. They will preserve their fighting capacity. They will move back. It'll be a fighting defense, and they will eat up Ukraine's forces exactly how they ate up Ukraine's forces during the Kharkiv offensive and then also the Kherson offensive, which is why General Zaluzhny is begging for this additional equipment, weapons, and ammunition in the first place, because his previous reserve is now gone. It disappeared during the Kharkiv and Kherson offensive, and now they are spread thin, and he even admits that in this interview. He talks about how Ukraine's forces are tied up absolutely everywhere and are bleeding. He has nothing to spare now, which is exactly what I said would happen after these offensives. Exactly like during the Ardennes offensive and then after the Ardennes offensive during or toward the end of World War II. Then he starts complaining about, he's claiming he needs all these additional systems, but then he starts complaining about the systems the West has already transferred to Ukraine. So HIMARS, and just like I said, the HIMARS are having no impact. He complains that Russia has put all of the targets Ukraine wants to hit out of range of HIMARS, and now he's begging for longer range weapons, which again, even if he gets them, Russia already has them in abundance. It's not a capability that Russia doesn't have, and it certainly is not a capability they can't, a threat that they can't adapt to. This whole interview is him talking about how essentially how bad things are, and he's explaining what he needs to overcome these problems, but these are things that the West simply doesn't have to give Ukraine. These are things that don't exist except maybe in Russia, and he's at the losing end of that arsenal. And the Duran, Alex Christoforou and Alexander Micuris, in a separate video, made a really good point that NATO is at a juncture here, the United States and NATO. They're at a juncture here where they either go all in or they admit that they've lost this conflict. And when they admit they lost this conflict, doesn't mean they're going to surrender. It'll be a very long, drawn-out process of Russia wearing down Ukraine's military, eliminating them through attrition on the battlefield, and also through these systematic missile and drone attacks, wiping out Ukraine's infrastructure. And that is what will lead to Ukraine's collapse. And it will take time. But that's where NATO is right now. And the problem NATO has is that what is left of their inventories really isn't all that much, and they are incapable, clearly, of fighting a protracted, large-scale conflict like this. This is their problem. They cannot do it by proxy because they're running out of everything. And if they were fighting it themselves, they would still have the same problem. They're running out of everything, and there clearly is no way for them to remedy that anytime in the near future. Russia's military prepared for this conflict. They created huge stockpiles, and they configured their military to fight a large-scale conflict like this. The United States and its allies have configured their militaries to fight these small interventions all around the world. Russia configured its military to fight this protracted, intense, large-scale conflict. And it's most likely, although we don't have the numbers, it's most likely true that they've configured their military industrial capacity in the same way, which is why after all of this time and after the West claiming Russia was going to run out of missiles, they're still firing huge numbers of missiles into Ukraine at least once a week, maybe sometimes every other week. So that's where we are with Ukraine. It should surprise nobody. I've been talking about this for months now. This conflict is going to be determined by military industrial output and the ability to continue feeding weapons, ammunition, and trained manpower into this conflict. Russia has the clear advantage here, and the West is admitting that it doesn't. The only way to fix this is to spend years building up the capabilities required to fight this type of conflict. They cannot do it now. It is impossible. So what they'll be doing is trying to stretch this out for as long as possible, to bleed out the Russians as much as possible. But at the end of the day, the longer this drags on, the weaker perhaps Russia may be at the end of this, but also NATO collectively. They will also be weaker at the end of this. And the US is not fighting only Russia. They're also fighting China. China is not suffering at all in any way because of this conflict. If anything, they are benefiting tremendously from it, because the Europeans have isolated themselves from Russian energy exports. All of that cheap energy is going to be going to China and to the rest of Asia, who are China's greatest trade partners. So it's a huge problem. It's a corner that they've painted themselves into. Again, as the Duran points out, there is no reverse gear. There is no way for people like this who created this conflict in the first place to exit from it. So we just have to wait for this to run its course. I will continue keeping track of this as I have been. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. In the video description, please find other ways to find and follow my work. All of my YouTube videos are automatically uploaded to Rumble and Odyssey. It might take a day or two, but they'll show up there. Subtitles for my YouTube videos are automatically generated, so please just be patient waiting for that to show up. I know that subtitles are important to some people. They will show up eventually. I am on Telegram. I am on Twitter. All of the links are in the video description below. All of the links to the articles that I've referenced and the videos on the Duran, they will be in the video description, as will be ways to help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel. If you see an ad pop up, feel free to skip past it. It's not helping me out at all. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee or through Patreon. I am no longer using PayPal. I have closed that account. I want to thank everyone who has been contributing. I greatly appreciate it, whether you're doing it month to month through one-time donations, or even if you're just helping out by sharing my work with others. It all helps out tremendously. Thank you so much. And as always, thank you for watching.